I've seen a lot of European channels react to this video, and not very many of them have a very strong opinion. And I respect that. It's their job. Why would they mess with it? That's not how we do things around these parts. And if you're new around here and you agree with anything that I'm saying, please consider dropping me a subscription, because I'm trying to hit a goal before the 250th anniversary when I get my 1776 tattoo. So here's the video. NATO without the USA.
Trump is calling NATO a paper tiger and saying a U.S. exit is beyond reconsideration.
So calling NATO a paper tiger might seem a bit random to the outside world, but I can understand why it lands with a lot of Americans. Let me explain. So from the world's point of view, NATO can look powerful on paper, but when anything goes down, they'll look immediately to Washington and be like, hey, if an alliance only works because one country is the muscle, the bank account, the emergency response team, the logistics, then what is it the rest of the people do? You've got a good reason to question that. This is where I think a lot of British reaction channels go, oh no, America, don't leave us, instead of asking, hey, why do they feel like that? So if NATO is only strong when America's holding it up, then calling it a paper tiger is not far-fetched at all. Think of it like this. It's like a group project at school. One kid does all of the work, and then everybody turns up the next day and said, yay, we did a great job. Doesn't work like that, bro.
Europe refused to support the Iran war. Spain closed its airspace to U.S. planes. Italy blocked U.S. bombers from landing at Sigonella. France banned U.S. resupply flights to Israel. The alliance has never looked this fractured.
Banned the US from using the airspace, stopped resupply flights. I do believe my own country stopped the US from using air bases, which belong to them anyway. You're literally helping the other side. This is supposed to be an alliance. I can totally understand why America would not be happy. It's a one-way street. The whole point of an alliance is built on trust. You're supposed to have their back and they're supposed to have your back. But actually, by doing these things, you are helping the people that they are fighting against.
So if the U.S. walks, what's left? The money. Let's start with the genuinely encouraging part, because Europe has actually been spending seriously. And finally, at the 2025 NATO summit in The Hague, member states agreed to hit 5% of GDP on defense by 2035. That's split into 3.5% for actual military hardware and troops and 1.5% for infrastructure, cyber, and industrial capacity. In 2025, European NATO members hit a record $600 billion in defense spending, up nearly 13% in real terms from the year before.
Now that's a massive number, so I don't want to dismiss it, but let me put it into some perspective. In 2026, Trump administration's defense budget proposal outlines a historic total funding requested approximately 1.5 trillion. That's more than double of what 30 other countries are doing. 30 other countries. These countries are developed countries. They have more people in it. Whenever you say the word superpower, not once ever is it mentioned anything about Europe. It's always like America, China, Russia. That's it. No one mentions Europe. I'm not saying that Europe should be helpless. I'm saying it should stop acting helpless. No country should be fully dependent on another country. You've got to be self-sustainable. Wow, this really got me going a little bit. My apologies.
Germany alone jumped to $107 billion, a country that was constitutionally and culturally pacifist for 8 decades after World War II. That kind of increase in 1 year is genuinely historic. Poland is already spending close to 5% of GDP on defense, the highest of any NATO member, and has quietly built one of the largest armies in Europe in just a few years.
Germany's a really interesting one because it's had a very different military culture since World War II. So when Germany starts spending again, you realize something in Europe seriously has changed. But again, from an American perspective, you might think, why did it take this long? The Americans have been warning Europe for many years now that military matters, and yet European countries have been comfortable letting America carry the heavier load. But my boy Poland over there, shout out to Poland. Poland seems to understand the threat more because it's closer to it. Countries on Europe's eastern flank seem to take things a little bit more seriously because they don't have the luxury of pretending that the threat is theoretical. Poland's not just sitting there saying, America, save us. They're actually arming themselves, preparing to protect themselves, and then they also want to have strong allies, which is exactly what the European Union is supposed to be. Also want to point out, Poland has the least migration in Europe, it is the safest country in Europe, and the list goes on. I don't know how Americans feel about Poland, but anybody with any common sense can see that, okay, they are trying.
Notably, Spain opted out of the 5% target entirely, which tells you the commitment isn't uniform.
So Spain just opted out, but they're still in it. If I don't pay my gym membership, they don't let me in the gym. Why are they allowed to still be in it if they refuse to pay? Burden sharing is not just about numbers. If the threat is real, the commitment needs to be real too.
But if the 3.5% core target gets hit broadly across the alliance, European defense spending could reach $850 billion by 2030, roughly where the US baseline sits today. From Washington's perspective, this is actually part of the case for stepping back. Europeans are finally paying their share after decades of leaning on American security guarantees. Whether the timing is smart or reckless is a separate debate, but the financial shift is real.
It's not like America's abandoning Europe. It's the only thing I can relate it to is when your child grows up, you've got to let them make their own mistakes so they can become an adult. Well, the time is now. Europe needs to step up.
The manpower. European NATO members field about 2.1 million active troops without the US. The numbers on paper are substantial. France, Germany, the UK, Poland, and Italy each have well over 100,000 active personnel.
A big army is not the same as a dangerous army. It's like me saying I've got a home gym. Yeah, I've got some weights, but it doesn't mean that I'm Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Poland alone has quietly become one of the most heavily armed countries on the continent. The problem is that headcount and actual combat effectiveness aren't the same thing. Europe runs a huge variety of non-interoperable weapon systems across its member states. Different tanks, different artillery, different infantry vehicles. None sharing parts or maintenance protocols across borders.
That's a big
The
problem.
European Defense Agency's own data shows EU states operate far more incompatible systems than the US military does. That makes joint operations expensive and logistically messy in ways that raw troop numbers don't capture.
You do not want to discover that your allies are using the wrong charger when the missiles are already flying. A military alliance has to be able to work together. It's not enough just to have the equipment has to work together too.
Europe is also genuinely short on things that make modern warfare actually work. Strategic airlift, the heavy transport planes needed to move large forces quickly over long distances, air-to-air refueling tankers, which determine how far your jets can actually reach, and deep strike capability, the ability to hit targets far behind enemy lines, which the US Air Force has provided to every major NATO operation for 30 years.
This is probably one of the most important sections in the whole video. People think that military power is about soldiers, tanks, and fighter jets, but modern warfare depends on the things behind that. Fuel, satellites, transport, intelligence, long-range capabilities, logistics, that's just to name a few. So when America says that Europe has been relying on them, this is what they mean. If Europe wants strategic independence, it has to build the boring stuff too, not just the ones that grab the headlines.
Analysts at Bruegel and the Kiel Institute calculated that plugging those gaps to credibly deter Russia by 2027 would need an immediate $270 billion annually and 300,000 additional combat-ready troops. Not by 2035, right now.
This is where timing becomes a problem. Because yeah, in the headlines, it sounds like Europe's heading in the right direction. But by 2035, what happens if a war starts in the next 3 years? And I hate to say it, but Europe's been diluted quite a lot year by year. And all it takes is a quick Google search to understand that an actual European in Europe will be that minority by then. So who exactly is it you're going to get to fight in these armies? An extra 270 billion annually? You just made a big deal over Germany putting in 100 billion. Where are you going to get that from? You got some countries that's not even putting any money in. Year after year, I have to sit here and watch my own country's military support from their own government go down and down.
That's the honest short-term picture, even if the long-term trend is heading the right way. Command and control. Probably the least talked about gap and the most dangerous one. NATO's entire command structure runs on American systems. Intelligence networks, satellite communication, surveillance, targeting data. Almost all of it US owned. Without that backbone, European multinational forces simply can't fight as a unified army. Defense analysts describe the existing workarounds as kludged together solutions, a polite way of saying nobody expects them to hold under real wartime pressure.
So to oversimplify that, basically by America leaving NATO, it doesn't just lose most of its muscle, it loses part of its brain too.
The US is already stepping back here. In early 2026, it handed two major NATO headquarters, Joint Force Command Naples and Joint Force Command Norfolk, to European officers. There are serious discussions about appointing Britain's Admiral Sir Tony Ratigan as Supreme Allied Commander Europe, replacing US Army General Christopher Cavoli. Supporters say it's healthy and long overdue. The counter-argument is straightforward. The command is only as good as the intelligence and systems feeding into it, and most of those are still American. Both points are fair.
This is actually healthy if Europe is serious. Europe should have more responsibility in its own defense, but leadership alone does not solve capability gaps. You can put a European officer in charge, but if the intelligence and the satellites and everything else is still American, then that means America is still the backbone. Put simply, you can change who sits at the desk, but if he doesn't own the computer, the Wi-Fi, or even have the password to it, then it's not going to make a difference.
The nuclear question. For 77 years, Europe's security rested on one simple guarantee. Attack a NATO member and you're risking nuclear war with America. That kept the peace on the continent longer than any period in modern history. If the US leaves, that guarantee goes.
This is where the conversation gets very serious. America's nuclear umbrella is probably the biggest reason that NATO has lasted so long. The message was simple. You attack NATO, you risk war with America. That is an enormous deterrent. If America leaves Europe, Europe doesn't just lose troops and bases, it loses the psychological weight that comes with having America on your side. That completely changes how enemies calculate the risk of invading Europe. The American nuclear umbrella is not just a weapon, it is a message. For decades, Europe has slept under that umbrella, and now the Americans are just asking, hey, why am I always the one holding it?
But Europe isn't standing still. On March 2nd, 2026, Macron announced what he's calling dissuasion avancée, forward deterrence, standing in front of a nuclear submarine at France's Ile-Longue naval base. The idea is that France extends its nuclear umbrella to cover Germany, Belgium, and Poland. Those countries contribute to conventional support roles like early warning and air defense, while Paris keeps sole control over the nuclear trigger and all escalation decisions. France and the UK have also formalized joint nuclear submarine patrols and shared research, a two-country European deterrent that didn't formally exist a year ago.
France stepping up matters. Britain and France having nuclear weapons matters. But it's not the same as the American guarantee. The world knows that America has, can, and will use nukes if necessary. So the question is not simply, does Europe have nukes? The question is, does Russia believe that France will risk Paris for Latvia, Estonia, Warsaw, or any of the other smaller countries in the European Union? A nuclear weapon only deters enemies if they believe you will use it. That's not any disrespect to France or England. Credibility matters just as much as capability.
Whether it actually works comes down to one thing. Does Russia believe France would use nuclear weapons to defend Warsaw or Tallinn? A French president deciding whether to risk Paris getting hit to protect Riga is a very different call than the one Washington has historically been willing to make. That's not a knock on France, it's just the cold logic of deterrence.
Literally what I've just said. It's the same in the animal kingdom, okay? The lion doesn't attack the strongest in the herd. It waits for the weakest of the prey that's trailing behind.
A European nuclear umbrella is better than nothing. Whether it's equivalent to the American one is a much harder question. What the US actually loses. Leaving NATO has a real upside on paper. Stationing over 100,000 troops in Europe is expensive.
This is the part that I guess every American taxpayer understands. That's money, personnel, equipment, risk. America, like every other country, has the right to ask where their sons and daughters and tax dollars are going, especially if they're being sent to a country that is totally capable and financially able to do it all themselves. But they're just not. It's not isolationism to want to withdraw that. It's accountability. It's not unreasonable for Americans to ask why their taxes are defending countries that have their own huge economics. Like, I'm English. I wonder about things like how come we've given India 5 billion in aid since the 70s, and yet they have a space program. What?
Redirecting those resources toward the Indo-Pacific, which the US's own 2026 National Defense Strategy names as the top strategic priority, is a coherent argument. And if Europe genuinely hits 5% of GDP on defense, the decades-long burden-sharing complaint largely goes away. The problem is what gets lost in practice. Europe isn't just a defensive obligation. It's the physical infrastructure that makes the US a global military power. Ramstein Air Base in Germany is currently being used to coordinate drone operations against Iran. Satellite relays and data connections run through it because direct control from the US would simply be too slow. Lose it, and those operations become significantly harder to run from anywhere else. Aviano Air Base in Italy is the only US fighter base south of the Alps, recently upgraded to project forces rapidly into the Mediterranean. Naval Station Rota in Spain handles ballistic missile defense and marine staging for the entire Atlantic. Retired US generals have said plainly that losing these bases drops America from a global superpower to a regional one.
Okay, so this is the argument against like a complete withdrawal. Those bases are not just charity, it gives America reach. Some of the US bases in Europe help America operate in places like the Middle East, the Atlantic, or the Mediterranean. So if America leaves NATO completely, it might lose a little bit of power and a little bit of reach. This is where it gets kind of complicated. A lot of military power is geography. If America gives up certain geographical locations, it might reduce its own global influence. Which is why I think this is part of Trump's art of the deal. You ask more than what you actually want, right? Now, hear me out. If America's providing all of this for Europe, I don't think they should be paying anything. If Europe is underneath the American umbrella, I don't think it should have to pay anything towards Europe until the day that Europe steps up and can match that same level. Those bases and geographical locations should be provided for free because you are under that umbrella. And as an Englishman, I ask my country to please spend more on our military than you do policing our internet activities.
It's not a political argument, it's logistics. Intelligence is the other side of it. European SIGINT and human intelligence networks give the US its picture of Russian naval movements in the Atlantic, terrorism networks across Africa, and threats across Eurasia. US collection capabilities are impressive, but not complete. And losing European partners leaves real blind spots that are hard to fill. Ukraine, Russia, and what comes next. Russia has been fighting in Ukraine for 5 years. It holds about 20% of Ukrainian territory and gains somewhere between 50 and 230 feet per day, essentially frozen into drone-saturated trench warfare. It's taken between 1.1 and 1.4 million casualties to get there. Technically winning, but slowly, and at a cost that would have broken most countries. US support, financial aid, intelligence, logistics is central to Ukraine's ability to keep fighting. Pull that out, and Europe would need to absorb the entire burden alone.
Ukraine is where this becomes urgent. Whatever people think about the Ukraine funding, the war has exposed two things. First, Russia is not as dangerous as what we thought it was going to be, but it is willing to absorb huge losses. I can't be the only one that remembers thinking, Russia's going to roll over them in 2 days. Well, that didn't happen, did it? Also, the realization that Europe wasn't ready to handle this kind of threat alone. So that must be why America's asking that if Europe's not willing to step up for something that's in their own backyard, why are we still having to pay the bill? I say we as if I'm American, but like, hey, look at my views and opinions.
while simultaneously trying to deter Russia on its own eastern flank, with all the gaps already described. Ukraine's spy chief and multiple Western intelligence assessments point to 2027 as the year Russia could be ready to test NATO's eastern flank directly. That's not a distant scenario. It's worth saying on the other side, this exact pressure is what finally pushed Europe to rearm. Countries that resisted defense spending for decades are now moving fast because the alternative is genuinely existential. The threat Washington spent years warning about has done more to change European defense budgets than decades of diplomatic pressure ever managed.
This is why Trump's pressure actually worked, whether you like his style or not. For years, polite diplomatic conversations in Europe did absolutely nothing to move Europe enough. But when America started seriously questioning them partaking in the European Union, all of a sudden everyone's like, hey, we need to really start spending on our military. Oh, let's get going. Let's fix this now. Why do you wait so long? Sometimes the only way to make an ally take more responsibility is to stop making them feel so comfortable. Trump's style might be loud, but Europeans' reaction certainly proved that the pressure is working.
The signal to everyone else. Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines are watching closely. If the US walks away from 31 treaty-bound democracies over a disagreement, every security commitment in the Pacific immediately means less. Japan is already reading the room, deploying long-range missiles to its southwestern islands to build independent strike capability against China. When allies start quietly building the capacity to operate without you, that says something.
What more can I say? This matters on a global scale. Yes, America's credibility matters, but so does its allies. Allies can't say America must keep its promises, while they treat their own promises as like an optional thing.
The bottom line, a NATO without the US is weaker now and potentially viable later, but that gap is exactly when Europe is most exposed. And it lines up
Potentially.
almost perfectly with when Russia might be most tempted to move. And for the US, walking away isn't just a budget call. It means giving up the infrastructure that makes American military power work everywhere else on the planet. If you want to know whether we're watching the start of World War III, check out the video on your screen. Thanks for watching.
So after all of that, if you're not picking up what I'm putting down, basically I'm saying I totally understand why America is making the moves that it's making. And why not? If you're going to put your own country first, like you should, like every country should, but they don't, then it's clear to see why America's making the moves it is. And if you're European and you have any disagreements with anything I've said, we have a section in the Discord for debating. I like debating people. If you would like to have an adult, civilized conversation, you're more than welcome to drop in there and I'll have a lovely conversation with you. I quite enjoy a good debate. You could even say I'm a master at it. Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Much love and God bless to you all. Thank you.